The siren's wail pierced the pre-dawn darkness over Tel Aviv on June 13, 2025. In the underground command center of Israel's Air Defense Corps, Colonel Sarah Goldstein watched as red dots began cascading across the massive digital display, like falling stars of destruction. Each dot represented an incoming ballistic missile, launched from Iranian soil 1,500 kilometers away, screaming toward Israeli cities at 5 times the speed of sound. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the gravity of the situation. "Initial count shows 200 ballistic missiles inbound, ma'am," replied Lieutenant Daniel Rosen, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "Time to impact. 11 minutes 40 seconds. Goldstein's mind raced through the calculations. Iran's ballistic missiles, traveling at Mach 5, could reach Israel in roughly 12 minutes from launch. The Iron Dome system, Israel's pride and technological marvel, was designed primarily for shorter-range rockets and artillery. These were long-range ballistic missiles, a different beast entirely. "Activate David's sling and arrow systems," she commanded. "Full defensive posture. And get me a direct line to the Pentagon." The command center erupted into controlled chaos. Technicians monitored screens showing the approaching missile swarm, while others coordinated with battery commanders across the country. The Iron Dome had successfully intercepted thousands of rockets over the years, but this was different. This was Iran's full ballistic missile arsenal being unleashed in what Tehran called Operation True Promise 2. As reported by military analysts, Iran had fired some 280 ballistic missiles at Israel in several barrages since the Israel Defense Forces began their operation against the Islamic Republic's nuclear program early Friday morning. The sheer scale was unprecedented. Designed to overwhelm Israel's sophisticated but ultimately finite defensive capabilities. "Colonel, we're tracking multiple launch sites across Iran," reported Major Alina Vasquez from the intelligence station. "Isfahan, Kermanshah, and Dezful are all active. They're using everything Sagil 2, Karam Shar, and what appears to be their new Khaibar Shikan missiles." Goldstein nodded grimly. The Khaibar Shikan, Iran's newest ballistic missile, boasted a range of over 1,400 kilometers and carried a payload specifically designed to penetrate hardened targets. If intelligence reports were accurate, these missiles could potentially breach even Israel's most protected installations. The first explosions began to bloom across the horizon as the Arrow 3 interceptors launched from their silos, their brilliant contrails painting streaks of light against the darkness. Each Arrow interceptor cost approximately $3 million, a price tag that seemed almost abstract until you realized Israel was about to fire dozens of them in the next few minutes. "Ma'am, we have Pentagon on secure line," announced communications specialist Rebecca Martinez. "General Morrison, this is Colonel Goldstein at Israeli Air Defense Command. We need immediate THAAD support. Iran has launched a massive ballistic missile attack over 200 inbound. Our systems are engaging, but we need additional layers." The voice of General Marcus Morrison, commanding officer of United States European Command, crackled through the secure channel. "Colonel, we're tracking the situation. USS Thomas Hudner is in position in the eastern Mediterranean. We're preparing to engage with Standard Missile 3 interceptors. How long can your systems hold?" Goldstein watched as the first wave of Iranian missiles began to descend through the atmosphere, their warheads glowing white-hot from re-entry. The Arrow system was performing admirably, but she could see gaps in the defensive net. Some missiles were breaking through. "Unknown, sir. We're engaging now, but this is beyond our designed capacity. We need everything you've got." The battle for Israel's skies had begun in earnest. In the distance, the distinctive sound of Iron Dome interceptors launching filled the Arrow rapid-fire series of pops and whistles that had become the soundtrack of modern Israeli defense. But tonight, it sounded different. Tonight, it sounded desperate. The first Iranian missile to breach Israel's defenses struck a residential area in Beersheba at exactly 5:47 a.m. local time. The explosion shattered windows for blocks around, sending Colonel Goldstein's heart racing as damage reports began flooding in. The Soroka Medical Center, southern Israel's largest hospital, had been hit directly, wounding approximately 80 people and causing extensive damage to the trauma wing. "Jesus Christ," muttered Lieutenant Rosen, watching the live feed from Beersheba. "They're targeting civilian infrastructure." Goldstein's jaw tightened. Iran's strategy was becoming clearer: overwhelm Israel's defenses with sheer volume. then target population centers to maximize psychological impact. It was a brutal calculus, but militarily sound. Every interceptor Israel fired was one less in their inventory. And Iranian intelligence knew exactly how many David's sling and arrow missiles Israel possessed. "Colonel, we're getting reports from all sectors," reported Major Vasquez. "Multiple impacts in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. The Iron Dome is intercepting most of the shorter-range debris, but the ballistic missiles are getting through. We've fired 37 arrow interceptors so far." The mathematics were stark and unforgiving. Israel's entire arrow inventory consisted of approximately 120 missiles, each one irreplaceable in the short term. At the current rate of expenditure, they would be depleted within hours. The David's sling system, designed for medium-range threats, was performing better, but facing the same problem: finite ammunition against a seemingly endless barrage. "General Morrison, we need immediate resupply and additional DAT coverage," Goldstein spoke into her headset. "We're burning through our inventory faster than projected." "Understood, Colonel. We're deploying to that batteries from our Qatar base. ETA 6 hours. In the meantime, USS Thomas Hudner and USS Carney are engaging Iranian missiles with their Aegis systems. From the eastern Mediterranean, the American destroyers were proving their worth. The Aegis combat system, with its sophisticated radar and standard Missile-3 interceptors, was designed specifically for ballistic missile defense. Each ship carried approximately 90 missiles, and they were firing them with deadly precision. As reported by military sources, American air defense systems and Navy assets in the Middle East were helping Israel shoot down incoming ballistic missiles that Tehran launched in response to Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and top military leaders. The coordination between Israeli and American systems was seamless, a testament to decades of joint training and technology sharing. "Splash 1, came the voice of Commander Jennifer Walsh from the USS Thomas Hudner. "Confirmed intercept of Iranian Sajil-2 missile, bearing 090, range 400 kilometers from Israeli coast." But even as the American ships engaged, the reality of the situation was becoming clear. Iran had launched what intelligence estimated to be nearly 300 ballistic missiles in the first wave alone. With more launchers being prepped across the country, the combined Israeli-American defensive network was impressive. But it had never been tested against such a massive simultaneous attack. "Colonel, we're detecting a second wave launching from Iranian sites," reported Lieutenant Rosen, his voice tight with stress. "Another 150 missiles, various types. Time to impact, 12 minutes. Goldstein felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about intercepting missiles anymore. It was about the survival of Israel's defensive capability. Every interceptor fired was ammunition that wouldn't be available for tomorrow's attack or the day after. Iran had thousands of missiles in its arsenal, while Israel's defensive systems, sophisticated as they were, had been designed for more limited engagements. "Patch me through to the Prime Minister's office," she ordered, "and get me a direct line to CENTCOM in Qatar. Need to escalate this to the highest levels." The second wave was beginning its descent, and Goldstein could see that several missiles were aimed directly at Israel's military installations. Iran wasn't just trying to terrorize civilians, they were attempting to decapitate Israel's ability to defend itself. The next few minutes would determine whether Israel's technological edge could survive the storm of Iranian steel and explosive falling from the sky. At 7:23 a.m. Israeli time, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood in the secure bunker beneath the Kiryat military headquarters in Tel Aviv, his face illuminated by the blue glow of multiple screens, showing the unfolding battle. The second wave of Iranian missiles had just made impact, and the reports were devastating. The 3 major air bases had been struck, though their hardened shelters had protected most aircraft. More critically, 2 David Sling batteries had been damaged, reducing Israel's mid-range defensive capability by nearly 15%. "Mr. Prime Minister," said Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, his voice hoarse from hours of coordinating responses, "we need to make the call to Washington. Our defensive systems are being systematically depleted. At current rates, we'll be critically low on interceptors within 18 hours. Netanyahu nodded grimly. The mathematics were inescapable. Israel had fired 63 Arrow interceptors, 47 David Sling missiles, and over 200 Iron Dome interceptors in the past 3 hours. American THAAD systems wouldn't arrive for another 3 hours, and intelligence suggested Iran was preparing a third wave of attacks. "Get me President Trump on the secure line," Netanyahu ordered. The connection was established within minutes, the encryption systems handshaking across continents to create a secure channel between Jerusalem and Washington. President Donald Trump's voice came through clearly despite the distance. "BB, I'm watching the situation. What do you need, Mr. President? We need immediate military assistance. Iran has launched nearly 400 ballistic missiles at us in the last 4 hours. Our defensive systems are holding, but we're running out of ammunition. We need THAAD systems, Patriot batteries, and immediate resupply of our interceptor missiles." Trump's response was immediate and decisive. "You'll have it. I'm ordering the immediate deployment of 3 additional THAAD batteries from our European stocks. General Morrison will coordinate with your people. How long can you hold?" 24 hours, maybe less if they maintain this pace," Netanyahu replied honestly. "They're not just trying to overwhelm us, they're trying to bankrupt our defensive capability." The strategy was becoming clear to military analysts on both sides of the Atlantic. Iran's missile barrage wasn't just about causing immediate damage, it was about forcing Israel to expend its entire inventory of expensive interceptors. Each Arrow missile cost approximately $3 million. Each David's Sling interceptor ran about $1 million, and even the smaller Iron Dome interceptors carried a price tag of $50,000 each. According to military intelligence reports, one analyst estimated that the value of the CHD missiles used in the conflict exceeded $498 million. The United States was burning through 15 to 20% of its global THAAD stockpile in just 11 days, from June 13th to June 24th, 2025, to bolster Israel's air defenses against Iranian ballistic missiles. "Colonel Goldstein, we have confirmation from CENTCOM," reported Major Vasquez. 3. That batteries are being airlifted from Ramstein Air Base in Germany. 8 hours. Additionally, the USS Arleigh Burke and USS Porter are being repositioned from the Persian Gulf to provide additional Aegis coverage. The reinforcements were substantial, but Goldstein wondered if they would be enough. Intelligence reports suggested Iran possessed over 3,000 ballistic missiles of various ranges, though not all were targeted at Israel. The Islamic Republic was fighting a war of attrition, betting that they could outlast Israel's technological superiority through sheer volume. "Ma'am, we're detecting preparations for a third wave," reported Lieutenant Rosen. "Satellite imagery shows missile launchers being erected at sites near Tabriz and Qom. Estimated payload: 200 missiles, mixed types." Goldstein checked her watch. It had been 6 hours since the first attack, and her forces were showing signs of strain. The Iron Dome operators had been at their stations continuously, their eyes red from staring at screens, their hands cramped from constant manipulation of targeting systems. The David Sling crews were rotating every 2 hours, but the mental stress was cumulative. "How's our ammunition status?" she asked. "Critical on Arrow interceptors. We're down to 47 missiles. David's Sling has 63 remaining. Iron Dome varies by battery, but we're below 50% across the board." The numbers painted a stark picture. Israel's multi-layered defense system, the envy of military planners worldwide, is being systematically degraded by Iranian persistence. The next wave would be the real test. Could the arriving American reinforcements bridge the gap? Or would Iran's missile arsenal finally overwhelm the combined Israeli-American defensive network? The distinctive roar of C-17 Globemaster transport aircraft filled the air over Nevada Air Base as the first wave of American reinforcements arrived at 1400 hours. Colonel Goldstein watched from the command center as the massive aircraft disgorged their precious cargo: THAAD interceptor missiles, Patriot PAC-3 interceptors. The technical crews needed to integrate them into Israel's defensive network. "Colonel, this is Major General Patricia Hayes, United States European Command," announced a tall woman in combat fatigues as she entered the command center. "We're here to augment your defensive capabilities. What's your current situation?" Goldstein gestured to the tactical display, where new red dots were already appearing. "General, we're tracking the third wave. 180 missiles inbound, mixed types. Our inventory is critically low. We need to make every shot count." Hayes nodded, her experienced eyes taking in the scope of the display. "Understood. We've brought 96 THAAD interceptors, 120 Patriot PAC-3 missiles, and full technical support. Our systems are designed to integrate with your network through the Link 16 data system. The integration was remarkable to watch. American and Israeli technicians worked side by side, their different accents and terminology blending into a unified language of defense. The THAAD system, designed specifically for high-altitude ballistic missile interception, would provide the upper layer of defense, while the Patriot systems would handle medium-range threats that penetrated the initial screen. General Hayes, "We're detecting launch signatures from multiple Iranian sites," reported Lieutenant Rosen. "The third wave is airborne. It's time to impact. 11 minutes 30 seconds. As documented in military reports, the Terminal High-Altitude Area Defense System represented America's most advanced ballistic missile interceptor. Each missile costs approximately $12 million. Its capability to intercept ballistic missiles in the terminal phase of flight made it invaluable for protecting high-value targets. The system's X-band radar could track multiple targets simultaneously, while its kinetic interceptors destroyed incoming warheads through sheer impact force. All systems. This is Goldstein. Weapons free. Engage all targets of opportunity. American systems are integrated and ready. The sky erupted in a display of defensive fire unlike anything seen in modern warfare. Aero interceptors launched from their silos, their exhaust trails creating geometric patterns against the afternoon sky. David's Sling missiles streaked upward from their mobile launchers, while the newly arrived VOD interceptors added their own brilliant contrails to the defensive umbrella. From the eastern Mediterranean, the USS Thomas Hudner and USS Carney continued their methodical engagement of Iranian missiles, their Aegis systems tracking and destroying threats at ranges exceeding 400 kilometers from the Israeli coast. The coordination was seamless, a testament to decades of joint training and shared technology. Splash 1, Splash 2, came the calls from various battery commanders as their interceptors found their marks. The Iranian missiles, traveling at hypersonic speeds, began disappearing from the tactical display as the multi-layered defense network engaged them in sequence. But Iran had learned from the previous attacks. Its wave included decoys and penetration, aids sophisticated countermeasures designed to confuse defensive systems, and waste interceptor missiles. Several Iranian missiles carried multiple warheads, separating in the upper atmosphere to present multiple targets to the defensive network. "Colonel, we're seeing separation events," reported Major Vasquez. "The Iranians are using multiple independently targetable warheads. Each missile is becoming 3 or 4 separate targets." The tactical situation became exponentially more complex. What had begun as 180 incoming missiles had suddenly become over 400 separate targets, each requiring individual engagement. The mathematics of defense shifted dramatically. Israel and the United States were now facing a scenario where they might need to fire 2 or 3 interceptors for every Iranian missile to ensure destruction. "General Hayes, we need to prioritize targets," Goldstein said, her voice tight with concentration. "Can't engage every separation. Focus on the primary warheads, the ones with the largest radar cross-sections." Hayes nodded, her fingers flying across her tactical tablet as she coordinated with American forces. "Concur. THAAD systems are focusing on the high-altitude targets. Patriots are engaging medium-range threats. Your Iron Dome will handle any fragments that penetrate the upper layers." The defensive engagement continued for 27 minutes, the longest sustained ballistic missile defense action in history. When it ended, the tactical display showed the results. 163 successful intercepts, 17 impacts on Israeli territory, and defensive ammunition stocks depleted to critical levels. The question now was whether Iran had more missiles to throw at the combined defensive network, or whether the arsenal of democracy had finally provided enough firepower to break the back of the Iranian attack. The casualty reports began streaming in as the smoke cleared from the third wave of attacks. 17 Iranian missiles had penetrated the defensive network, striking targets across Israel with devastating precision. The northern port city of Haifa had been hit twice, with one missile destroying a section of the oil refinery and another damaging the commercial port. In Tel Aviv, a missile had struck a residential complex, killing 14 civilians and wounding 43 others. Colonel Goldstein stood in the command center, her uniform wrinkled and stained with coffee, her eyes red from 16 hours of continuous operations. The tactical display showed the aftermath of the engagement-friendly interceptor tracks crisscrossing the sky like a deadly spiderweb, while the red dots of successful Iranian impacts blinked ominously on the map. "Colonel, we're receiving intelligence reports from multiple sources," announced Major Vasquez, her voice hoarse from hours of coordination. "Satellite imagery shows Iran is preparing for a fourth wave. They're repositioning mobile launchers and bringing reserve missiles out of hardened storage." The intelligence was sobering. Despite launching over 500 ballistic missiles in the past 18 hours, Iran's missile arsenal remained substantial. American intelligence estimates suggested the Islamic Republic possessed over 3,000 ballistic missiles of various ranges, though not all were configured for strikes against Israel. "What's our ammunition status?" Goldstein asked, though she already knew the answer would be grim. "Critical across all systems, ma'am," reported Lieutenant Rosen. "We're down to 23 Arrow interceptors. 31 David Sling missiles and the Iron Dome batteries are averaging 20% of capacity. The American THAAD systems have 47 interceptors remaining." General Hayes, who had been coordinating with Pentagon officials for the past hour, looked up from her secure communications terminal. "Colonel, I've just received authorization for Operation Dome Shield. We're deploying 2 additional THAAD batteries from our continental United States inventory, plus emergency resupply of all interceptor types." The scope of American support was unprecedented. According to military sources, the United States had expended an estimated 15 to 20% of its global stockpile of THAAD interceptors in just 11 days to bolster Israel's air defenses. The financial cost was staggering, over $800 million in interceptor missiles alone, not counting the deployment costs of ships, aircraft, and personnel. "Ma'am, we're detecting launch preparations at multiple Iranian sites," reported Lieutenant Rosen. "This looks like the Big One satellite imagery shows over 250 missiles being prepared for launch." Goldstein felt the weight of the moment. This fourth wave would likely determine the outcome of the defensive battle. If Iran could overwhelm the combined Israeli-American defensive network, they would achieve their strategic objective of rendering Israel's air defenses ineffective. If the defensive network held, Iran would have expended a significant portion of their ballistic missile arsenal with limited strategic gain. "General Hayes, we need to make a decision," Goldstein said quietly. "Do we engage this wave with our remaining interceptors, or do we selectively defend only the most critical targets?" The question embodied the cruel mathematics of modern warfare. Each interceptor missile cost millions of dollars and represented months of production time. The Israeli defense establishment had always planned for limited engagements, rocket barrages from Gaza, medium-scale attacks from Hezbollah, perhaps a limited Iranian strike. No one had envisioned this level of sustained ballistic missile bombardment. Hayes studied the tactical display, her experienced eye calculating ranges, trajectories, and probability of kill ratios. "Colonel, I recommend we implement selective engagement protocols. We focus our remaining interceptors on threats to critical infrastructure, power plants, ports, air bases, and population centers. We let the less critical targets go." It was a harsh decision, but militarily sound. Israel could rebuild damaged facilities, but it couldn't manufacture new interceptor missiles in the middle of a battle. The defensive network needed to survive long enough for American reinforcements to arrive and resupply the depleted systems. "All battery commanders, this is Goldstein. Implement selective engagement protocols. Priority targets only. Make every shot count." The fourth wave began its launch sequence at 1900 hours. The Iranian missiles rising from their launchers in groups of 10 and 20, their exhaust plumes visible on satellite imagery. 253 ballistic missiles were airborne, representing perhaps the largest single ballistic missile attack in history. The defensive network prepared for what would likely be the decisive engagement of the battle. The question was whether the arsenal of democracy, stretched across 2 continents and depleted by days of continuous combat, could hold the line against Iran's final throw of the dice. The fourth wave struck with the precision of a sledgehammer against glass. At 1947 hours, the first Iranian missiles began their terminal descent, their warheads glowing white-hot as they plunged through the atmosphere at nearly 7,000 kilometers per hour. Colonel Goldstein watched the tactical display with the detached fascination of a mathematician, observing a complex equation solve itself in real time. "Weapons free," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension in the command center. "All systems engage." The remaining Arrow interceptors launched first, their brilliant exhaust trails reaching toward the stratosphere, where they would attempt to destroy the Iranian warheads before they could begin their final descent. Each launch represented over $3 million of Israeli taxpayer money. But more importantly, each represented one less interceptor available for future attacks. Aerosystems Engaging reported Major Vasquez confirmed launches from batteries, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. All remaining interceptors are airborne. The 23 Aero missiles streaked skyward, their sophisticated guidance systems tracking the incoming Iranian warheads with millimeter precision. The interceptions, when they came, were violent and brief hypersonic collisions that created brief flowers of light in the upper atmosphere as kinetic energy was converted to heat and expanding debris. Splash 4, Splash 7, Splash 12 came the reports from the Aero battery commanders. But the mathematics were unforgiving. 23 interceptors could only engage 23 targets, and there were over 250 Iranian missiles in the air. The David Sling systems engaged next, their interceptors designed for the medium-range threats that had penetrated the Aero screen. General Hayes coordinated the American THAAD systems, their radar operators calling out targets and engagement solutions with professional comm. THAAD systems engaging high-priority targets, Hayes announced. Confirmed lock on packages targeting Haifa Refinery and Ben Gurion Airport. The defensive engagement continued for 18 minutes, the longest sustained ballistic missile defense action in military history. When it ended, the results were sobering. The combined Israeli-American defensive network had successfully intercepted 187 Iranian missiles. But 66 had penetrated the defensive umbrella. The impacts were devastating. The Haifa oil refinery was struck 4 times, setting the facility ablaze and sending a pillar of black smoke into the evening sky. Ben Gurion Airport was hit twice, destroying the main terminal and cratering the primary runway. Power plants in Ashkelon and Ashdod were struck, plunging large sections of southern Israel into darkness. Casualty reports are coming in, reported Lieutenant Rosen, his voice strained. Preliminary estimates suggest over 200 civilian casualties, with significant damage to critical infrastructure. But perhaps more critically, Israel's defensive ammunition was now essentially exhausted. The tactical display showed the stark reality: 0 Aero interceptors remaining. For David's Sling missiles and Iron Dome batteries averaging less than 10% capacity. The American THAAD systems had 11 interceptors left. Colonel, we're receiving intelligence reports of a 5th wave preparation, announced Major Vasquez. Satellite imagery shows mobile launchers being repositioned across Iran. Estimated payload, 150 missiles. Goldstein felt the weight of potential defeat settling on her shoulders. The defensive network that had protected Israel for over a decade was effectively neutralized. The Iron Dome could still engage short-range rockets and artillery, but against ballistic missiles, Israel was essentially defenseless. General Hayes, what's the status of our resupply? Goldstein asked. Hayes consulted her tactical tablet, her face grim. Emergency resupply is en route from the United States, but ETA is 36 hours minimum. We're pulling interceptors from every available stockpile, but the logistics are challenging. The cruel mathematics of modern warfare had finally caught up with Israel's defensive strategy. The multi-layered defense network, technological marvel though it was, had been designed for limited engagements against specific threats. No one had envisioned a sustained ballistic missile bombardment of this magnitude. Ma'am? Incoming flash message from the Prime Minister's office, reported the communications specialist. You're ordered to report to the Kyria immediately for emergency consultation. As Goldstein prepared to leave the command center, she took one last look at the tactical display. The screen showed the defensive network in its current state, bebleeded, exhausted but still functional. The question was whether it could survive long enough for American reinforcements to arrive and restore Israel's defensive capability. The 5th wave was already being prepared, and Israel's shield was cracked. The next few hours would determine whether the defensive network could hold, or whether Iran's strategy of overwhelming Israel's technological superiority through sheer volume would finally succeed. The secure conference room beneath the Kyria was filled with Israel's top military and political leadership. When Colonel Goldstein arrived at 2200 hours, Prime Minister Netanyahu sat at the head of the table, his face drawn with exhaustion and stress. Defense Minister Gallant reviewed casualty reports, while Chief of General Staff Herzi Halevi studied satellite imagery of Iranian missile sites. Colonel Goldstein, Netanyahu said as she entered, "Give us your assessment. Can our defensive networks survive another major attack? Goldstein's response was honest and direct. Sir, with current ammunition levels, we cannot sustain another wave of the magnitude we've just experienced. Our defensive capability is essentially exhausted. We need immediate resupply, or we're looking at catastrophic damage to our infrastructure and population centers. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Israel's technological superiority, the foundation of its defense strategy for decades, had been systematically degraded by Iranian persistence. The Islamic Republic's strategy of overwhelming Israel's defensive network through sheer volume had proven devastatingly effective. What are our options? Asked Holive. We have 3 courses of action, Goldstein replied. First, we can attempt to engage the 5th wave with our remaining interceptors and hope American resupply arrives in time. Second, we can negotiate a ceasefire through third-party mediation. Third, we can preemptively strike Iranian missile sites to prevent the 5th wave from launching. Netanyahu leaned back in his chair, weighing the options. Each carried enormous risks. A preemptive strike might escalate the conflict beyond ballistic missile exchanges. A ceasefire would essentially reward Iran's aggression. Attempting to defend with exhausted resources risked catastrophic damage to Israel's infrastructure. Mr. Prime Minister, said Gallant, I've been in contact with Secretary of Defense Austin. The Americans are prepared to provide immediate air support for strikes against Iranian missile sites. They're also expediting resupply of our interceptor systems. At that moment, an aide entered with an urgent message. Sir, we're receiving reports that Qatar is offering to mediate a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. President Trump has apparently asked the Emir of Qatar to broker an agreement. The diplomatic opening came at a crucial moment. According to intelligence reports, Iran was also facing ammunition constraints. While their ballistic missile arsenal was substantial, the precision-guided munitions used in the attacks against Israel represented a significant portion of their most advanced capabilities. Colonel, what's the status of the 5th wave? Netanyahu asked. Goldstein consulted her tactical tablet. Intelligence suggests the Iranians are having logistical difficulties. Several mobile launcher units have mechanical problems, and there are reports of supply shortages at some missile sites. The 5th wave appears to be delayed. The delay provided a crucial window of opportunity. American resupply aircraft were already en route from multiple locations, carrying emergency stocks of interceptor missiles. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group was positioning in the eastern Mediterranean, its aircraft ready to provide additional defensive coverage. General Hayes, what's the current status of American reinforcements? Netanyahu asked. Hayes, who had been coordinating with Pentagon officials throughout the meeting, looked up from her communications terminal. Sir, we have emergency resupply scheduled to arrive within 12 hours. 200 Daughter interceptors, 300 Patriot PAC-3 missiles, and full resupply of Iron Dome interceptors. Additionally, we're deploying 2 additional Aegis destroyers to provide offshore defensive coverage. The scale of American support was unprecedented, representing the largest emergency military aid operation since the Berlin airlift of 1948. The financial cost was staggering over $1 billion in interceptor missiles alone. But the strategic implications of Israel's defensive network being overwhelmed were considered unacceptable by Washington. Mr. Prime Minister, said the aide, we're receiving confirmation that Iran has agreed to enter ceasefire negotiations. The Qatari mediators are suggesting a 48-hour cooling-off period to allow for talks. Netanyahu made his decision. Colonel Goldstein, return to your command post. Prepare to receive American resupply and integrate the new systems. We'll accept the ceasefire offer, but we maintain full defensive readiness. The ceasefire agreement was announced at 0300 hours on June 24, 2025, ending 12 days of the most intensive ballistic missile combat in history. Iran had launched over 700 ballistic missiles at Israel, while the combined Israeli-American defensive network had fired over 500 interceptors in response. The final tally was sobering. Israel had suffered significant infrastructure damage and over 300 civilian casualties. But the defensive network had prevented catastrophic destruction. Iran had expended approximately 30% of its most advanced ballistic missile arsenal while achieving limited strategic objectives. As Colonel Goldstein returned to her command center, she reflected on the lessons of the conflict. Israel's multi-layered defense network had proven remarkably effective, but the battle had exposed the limitations of even the most sophisticated defensive systems when faced with massive sustained attacks. The partnership with American forces had been crucial, but the financial and logistical costs were enormous. The tactical display now showed a different picture: green dots representing incoming American resupply aircraft, friendly naval units providing offshore coverage, and the complex web of defensive systems being rebuilt and reinforced. The shield had held, but barely, and everyone understood that the next conflict would require new strategies, new technologies, and perhaps most importantly, new levels of international cooperation. The dawn of June 24th brought not just the end of the missile battle, but the beginning of a new era in defensive warfare, where the arsenal of democracy would need to be deeper, more responsive, and more resilient than ever before.